Why are we talking header tanks again? Because as builders we have so much to learn from observing the handiwork of our fellow builders. Watch now as we see some header tank installations others have constructed, followed by a short video from a commercially available header tank kit for the Rotax 912. Here is an installation of a header tank in a Zenith CH750 by Frank Peace for a fuel-injected engine. We are looking behind the pilot seat back that has not been installed yet. Note the robust support of the tank using extruded aluminum angle attached to the top and bottom of the fuselage with strengthening gussets at 4 locations. The fuel enters the top of the tank from the wing tanks, as well as a connection for the vent and the fuel gauge sender in the middle. At the bottom is the redundant exits with fuel filters, as well as the return line back to the tank from the engine. Looking at the back side, we see the 2 fuel pumps combining their output to a manifold at the top, and then one more high pressure filter with a fuel line to the engine.
So we're going to recommend and explain the header tank system for high-wing airplanes. Here we have a fuel cell that's been mounted to the structure of the airplane. The bottom fittings, what we have done here is we have an outlet starting from the right here, working our way to the left. We just screwed a filter in here, an automotive carbureted type of filter, a low pressure filter, and you can do that, or you can have a nipple here and put the filter in the hose, but this just worked out nice. And then we always use, for a low pressure side, just these spring clamps, so it's easy to replace things, and we put the O-ring grease on the hoses so everything can be taken apart easy and filters can be replaced. When there's no pressure, your job is mostly to have a secure attach point, but at the same time you should be able to service it, and if you don't put any grease on there, you would have to cut the hose each time, and of course then you have lots of labor each time you want to replace the filter. Okay, looking at the header tank in the back of the 701 Zenith, we have a 3.5 gallon header tank. The bottom, of course, we're seeing the exit of the tank, which there are 2 hoses coming out. One is for the primary fuel pump, and the one behind it is for the backup. Now, to have a true dual system, we have these 90-degree fittings screwed in with the Teflon paste up in here, and using the Oetiker clamps, and obviously the 5/16 fuel injection hose, not the regular fuel hose you would get if you just ask for fuel hose at the automotive store. And then we run the low pressure filters, 2 of those, in order to again have the redundancy of one filter possibly being clogged, and then once we go to the backup pump, we would then immediately also get the backup filter. Now, these are we're gonna go from the drain through the filter to the inlet of the fuel pump. Now, we're going to talk more about the inlet of the fuel pump once we cover the rest of the header tank. So let's take a look at the top of the header tank. What we've got is a 701, which doesn't have a whole lot of structure in this area. So what we ended up doing is getting some 1/8" aluminum angle, 1 by 1 by 1/8" thick. And we went across the whole span of the baggage compartment in the rear here and also in the front, and we spaced that about 12 inches apart. That's something that you would put in once you have the tank, so you can measure all that out. And then we put spacers up in there, about an 1-inch spacer, and we got some AN bolts, and we bolted these brackets in that come with the header tank. And then we bent this down a little bit so that it was easy to slide the tank in, and then clamped it up in there. But before we did, we also measured the hole locations for the two exits on top of the tank, one being a vent that we're going to explain how that goes back up to one of the fuel tanks, and the other one being the feed from the two tanks. So they drain into the tank here, and then there's a vent. Now, the other thing that's on this tank that's hard to film is on the back side, and we do have a picture of that on the website, and it is a fitting where you can install the optional but nice to have fuel level switch, and that'll tell you as you're flying and your wing tanks are draining into the header tank, when you're starting to use the header tank, which is and there's a light on the panel, and it will light up, and you will test it as you're fueling the plane the first time, make sure that it goes out. Gives you a really nice indication that, okay, yeah, I'm down on my header tank, I've got, half hour or whatever left that I can fly. And that way you don't have to carry the wing tanks full of fuel all the time, because you have a reliable way of knowing exactly what you got left.
A half-inch diameter fuel vent line has been run to the outboard front side of each tank, next to the fuel filler neck. This vent line runs through the trailing edge of the wing to the root. A half-inch diameter fuel supply line has been run from the rear inboard side of each tank. This fuel supply line also runs through the trailing edge of the wing, so that both the supply and the vent lines are neatly accessible at the wing. The fuel supply and fuel vent lines enter the fuselage behind the rear spar carrier. Here we can see that Skytech has temporarily installed clear fuel lines for testing purposes. The fuel supply and vent lines are plumbed into a header tank. It should be noted that the header tank, which has been specifically designed for this application, is made in such a way that it maximizes the purging of air from the fuel system. A good header tank design will also allow for quick refilling from the main wing tanks. This is the reason that Skytech has chosen half-inch fuel supply and vent lines between the header and fuel tanks. The Skytech 750 fuel system, with the large diameter fuel lines and header tank, is designed to meet Rotax's requirements of providing the engine with maximum fuel flow at all times. Even though the 912IS is extremely fuel efficient, to effectively purge any air from the fuel system and to allow rapid self-priming of the fuel pumps, Rotax has designed the injection system to return a high volume of fuel to the aircraft tanks or header system. Special consideration has to be given to the airframe fuel system design to accommodate this and assure proper fuel flow in all possible flight conditions. Consider the design of a basic wing tank fuel system. In level flight, both wing tanks are able to supply fuel to the engine. However, in a side slip or an uncoordinated turn, there's a high possibility that one tank will have the fuel supply pickup unported or open to air instead of fuel, as the fuel sloshes to one side of the tanks. Combining a side slip or uncoordinated turn with low fuel levels in the tanks may result in both fuel supply lines becoming unported. An interruption in fuel delivery or ingestion of air into the fuel supply must be avoided for any fuel injection system. Any interruption in the high-volume fuel supply may cause a fuel-injected engine to stop. The high-volume fuel return requirements of a fuel-injected system also add potential complications to the fuel system design. In this example diagram of the Skytech designed fuel system, we see that the fuel is allowed to very quickly flow from the wing tanks to the header tank through the half-inch supply lines. By virtue of the large half-inch diameter lines, any fuel vapor or air bubbles are simultaneously allowed to travel back up these lines unrestricted and then vented to atmosphere through the vented fuel tank lids. The fuel is then fed from the header tank to the filter and fuel pumps through 3/8-inch lines. The fuel return from the injection system is then fed back to the header tank through 3/8" lines. Any air in the system is vented from the header tanks to the wing tanks through the 1/2" vent lines. In an extreme condition of prolonged slip or uncoordinated turn, both fuel tank supply lines may become unported. In this case, fuel will cease to be supplied to the header tank until a level flight condition is returned to. Skytech has designed the header tank to hold enough fuel for the high volume demands of full engine power for 5 minutes with an additional 1.5 safety margin. The header tank also incorporates a low fuel warning sender. This will warn the pilot of low header tank volume during a side slip, uncoordinated turn, or just a low fuel condition. It seems that Skytech has thoroughly considered all potential issues in providing appropriate fuel supply to a fuel-injected engine in a high-wing aircraft.